This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southern Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor. And we finished up our series asking for a friend, and Sunday was a bit different. So if you didn't catch those, you'll want to go back and listen to those podcasts. We covered about 21 questions in between both services. So we split up the questions between two services, and we asked if you had any other questions that you could give those to us. So we have a couple questions that we're going to cover that were not covered on Sunday. But before we get into those, I just want to ask Pastor Scott, is there anything from yesterday that you feel like you kind of had to speed through based on the amount of time, or that you want to take a moment to clarify a little bit more?
All 21 questions. I didn't realize that we did 21 questions in one day.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably, I think when we used to do the rapid fire, I think we were lucky to get through like 6 or 7 per service.
Yeah.
And we did 21. That sounds crazy. So there was a lot of it that I rushed through, but one in particular that I was thinking about this morning was we were talking about interracial marriage, and I was saying there's no issue there whatsoever. In fact, people that say anything about interracial marriage, I think it's absolute demonic. But that leads us to talk about dating and marriage and things like that. And so being a former youth pastor, I'm used to talking about this subject with people that are kind of at the front end of their journey. So when I say Christians, you should not date non-Christians, I'm directing that, yes, to all. That by a general rule of thumb, that's for everyone.
Yeah.
But as we know, life can be very, very messy at times, and sometimes we start this faith journey later on in life. And so, it occurred to me that there may be some people that are pretty far into some relationships to where now the casualties would not be God-honoring in that. However, I do think that something should happen, right? So, if you've been in a long-term relationship and there's now kids and finances involved, that's not just my pastor said I can't date non-Christians, see you later type conversation whatsoever, because, God is not, that's probably not going to be the direction that you feel the Lord leading in regards to that. I'm saying if you're a college student and you're trying to decide who you're going to go out with on Friday night, don't go out with a non-believer.
Right.
That's the hard and fast rule there. The rest of it, as life goes on, it gets a little messy. I would say to anyone that is in one of those long-term relationships that now you go out and have kids, kind of built a life together, but you're just not married, I would say something that y'all need to go ahead and take that step. Like, especially if the person you're with is, okay, they're not a Christian, but they're totally fine with your faith, and you maybe raising your children in that way. If they're not a hindrance to that, I would say y'all need to take your next, don't continue where you're at. Right. You need to take that next step into marriage. But again, like on Sunday morning when I'm trying to answer 21 questions in practically no time flat, I'm going to miss nuances like that. Because every question there's nuance involved that I can't go into every single situation. But the hard and fast rules, like Christians, please date Christians. It's going to go better for you if you're already kind of past that in some of these stages of life. Then do what you can to faithfully honor God with your life and get married, yada yada yada. But do what's right, because once you have obligations like kids and things like that, there's not a quick answer anymore. I gave a quick answer yesterday, and there might have been people sitting there going, oh gosh, what am I supposed to do now? And it's well, wait a second. Hard and fast rules are good sometimes, but more often than not, conversations are what is needed, which is why sometimes we get into these messes with our questions, because we go I cannot answer that quickly, because maybe I need to hear from you to hear exactly the situation that you find yourself in before I give you advice. That
Right.
was probably the one out of all 21 yesterday that I felt like I was like, oh, I missed like this kind of like really big part of it
Yeah.
that could have caused a lot of questions, I guess, or a lot of people going like, oh man, my pastor told me I need to break up with my long-term live-in girlfriend or boyfriend. And we got 3 kids together, and like all this. It's like,
absolutely.
well, wait a second. Let's have a little bit longer conversation to find out what the God-honoring path is for you in that situation. But if you're a college student, you're on the front end of this. You're a high schooler. You're a middle schooler. This is where it's really, really important.
Yeah.
Because again, those that have made different decisions and have kind of wound up in that first category I've been talking about, that makes things much more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so my guess is even you would find people in those situations that are now very serious about their faith that would go, probably should have listened to this sort of advice, or I wish I had someone to tell me this earlier on in life because it would have saved me a lot of heartache, a lot of pain and things like that. But with all of this though, like we need to be very loving in the way that we talk about this, because I'm not saying Christians only date Christians because we're superior to anyone or anything. It's just like you want someone that's going to go in the same direction with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people that don't want to honor God with their life, that's their prerogative, but it's going to be hard for you to.
Yeah, I think this is maybe a very small example or something like that seems silly to relate this to, but it's like when you're trying to diet in the house and nobody else in the home is trying to eat healthy too, and they're still buying the junk food and bringing it in. I mean, that temptation's like it is so hard to do, and so it's even with those kind of things. Like if you're in a relationship with someone who isn't wanting to do the same things as you, it's not going to be good. And as I said yesterday, like I did this, and I did this partly. I mean, there was a lot going on in my life at the time. But part of it was I tried dating Christian boys, but they weren't really Christian boys. You know what I'm saying? And so I was like, forget it. I'm not. If they're going to be like this, I'll just go down this road.
Well, it just creates a lot of problems.
Yeah.
With like, so I on the back end of all of this in ministry, I'm now like, I have women whose husbands are not Christians and they're married.
Yeah.
And they go like, they don't want me to give to the church.
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, but you feel like you should as a follower of Jesus, right? Yeah. See, now that's because you're going to come into church and you're going to hear sermons on giving and generosity, and you're going to feel like there's a part of your faith that is inaccessible to you because of the situation that you have found yourself in. So see how like there's always a conversation to be had, but it just makes things, because it's not just surrounding the topic of sex.
Right.
That's like low hanging fruit when it comes to this. But there's like, I know people that at our church that have been saved and their significant other is not saved, their spouse is not saved. They want to like spend a bunch of time at the church. They want to serve. They want to show up early. They want, and then
their spouse
eventually,
doesn't get it.
exactly,
It causes
exactly,
tension and fights. And,
it's not even just in the area of sex. This is like, listen, this is going to cause you major issues, and I do want to also make it clear that I think that what the Bible says on this topic is a direction of wisdom and not necessarily a direction of, like, I don't know that I would say that you're sinning if you choose not to. Like, now, if you're having premarital sex, yes, you're sinning. Right. But, like, I'm not. If you end up in a marriage with a non-believer, I'm not going to say that I think that that's necessarily a sin, even though I think that it goes against the wisdom of the Scriptures, and I think that your life as a follower of Jesus in that relationship is going to be much more difficult than it has to be. Because I'll just be honest, as a married Christian to another Christian, it's hard enough. If you were to put that sort of division where one of us is trying to honor God, the other is not, I mean, it just makes things so hard. But conversations definitely. That was one that I should have been more careful with yesterday. But I get really passionate about young single people making better decisions, because I've seen so many of them end up dating people that are not Christians, and they're not at church anymore. In fact, they're not anywhere close to the faith that they had found in their singleness, and they let something trump that. They let something be more important than that, and that absolutely breaks my heart to see someone at a church serving and all this stuff, and then they're like, this new guy or gal shows up, and it's like, oh, I can already see where this is heading, and I don't want that for you.
Yeah,
so.
and I think it's important to remember, like, so for me with the guys that I tried to date early on, like, knowing that just because somebody says something doesn't mean that it's true. Like, so seeing the fruit of their life, like seeing how they live their life and what they truly believe before you get into those things.
If they say that they're a Christian, they're trying to sleep with you on the first date, they're not a Christian.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, and so it goes back to that nice little phrase you said: if they'll lead you to the bedroom and not to the church, they're not for you. But if they do both, they're still not there either, right?
It's not a good idea.
So yeah, just knowing that, and I think that's why we said, when we do the series next year, we want you to submit your names and things so we can have a conversation with you to follow up, especially because we may not be able to do a 21 question day again next year, and knowing that, like, hey, we do want to answer your questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes there, like, I know that we've gotten some in the past that there needed to be some kind of like counseling within that.
Yeah, there should be.
And we can't follow up with you. And so when we say that we're going to ask for names and that kind of thing, it's not really for anything except for just being able to clarify and really help you take your next steps if that needs to be done.
And it's also I will say, it's also to assess whether or not the question is being asked in the right spirit.
Right. Yes.
Because sometimes, and this is all of us can learn from this. Sometimes we just need to consider the source whenever we are faced with something before we invest a whole lot of time, energy, effort, and emotion into it.
Yes.
Right? Because, like, sometimes somebody will say something about you in life, and you'll go, like, really hurt about it. But then, like, if you knew who it came from, you go, like, oh, my gosh, I can't believe I spent even a minute thinking about that, considering the source. So that's the other, because I want to answer questions that people are actually struggling with.
Yes.
I don't want to answer questions that people are just trying to pick a fight with the church.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so one of the questions you got from yesterday was, if God created everything, who created God?
This is every, like, atheist and agnostic, like, favorite question to ask, and they feel like it's like their trump card, like, oh, this is how I just shut this whole thing down. You're going to tell me God created everything, and then I'm going to come back with something clever like, well, who created God? And the problem with that question is that a created God has never been the argument of people of faith whatsoever. As far as the Judeo-Christian view of God, we are not dealing with a created God. And here is what, like, kind of baffles me with this, like, very simplistic question that people try to think is such a clever question. Up until about the 1920s, the scientific community accepted that the universe was the eternal uncaused cause. They just accepted that the universe has always been here, that it did not have a beginning, that it was always around. Up until about the 1920s, through the use of the Hubble telescope, they were able to look and see the expansion of the universe, and so they've dialed that back to a moment, a singularity, when everything popped into existence all at once. All space, all time, all matter popped into existence all at once, which meant that whatever caused that has to be immaterial, because there was no matter before matter was created. It has to be timeless, because there was no time before that singularity. It had to be spaceless, because there was no space before. So everything all happened at once, and whether you want to call that the Big Bang Theory, or whether you want to call that in the beginning God created, like, it doesn't matter to me. But what we do know that is backed up through the scriptures and through science is that there does seem to be someone behind all of this. And our claim is not that the one that is behind the created order was also created. So it bothers me that the scientific community was totally okay with an uncaused universe for all of those years.
Yeah.
We're totally fine with just saying, yeah, it's just always been here. It didn't have a cause. It didn't need a first cause. We just accept that the universe is eternal. He goes, okay. And then when you find out that the universe had a beginning, why then can you not also apply the same logic that you were using for all of that time to God.
Right.
And go, yeah, he doesn't need a creator. So it's really just not a good question because we are arguing for an uncreated creator.
Yeah.
We're not arguing for a created creator. Then I would have to go and answer that question. Furthermore, what the other thing that like just philosophically speaking, that question only kicks the can down the road because you can only ask it so many times. Oh, who created God? Well, God created God. Who created that God? God created that. It just kicks the can down to the point where you still come to the point where you have to have a first cause.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to have that, no matter how many times you want to kick the can down the road with your little clever questions. Like, you have to have a first cause, unless you're just going to say, well, no, there was something that just always existed that was immaterial, that was spaceless, that was, oh, you mean God. Right? It's not a good question, even though most of the time that it's posed, people feel like, I got you. And it's like, no, you're setting up a straw man and tearing it down because we don't even teach that God was created. So you're dealing with a totally different foreign thing, and it's very disingenuous to what the scientific community believed before the 1920s and 1930s anyways. So it's not a very good question, and so hopefully we learn how to properly answer that, so we can move past. There's much better. I'm not saying that there's not great challenges from the scientific community, the atheistic and agnostic community. They have much better arguments than this. This is like bottom shelf type questions that we should have an answer for.
Cool. The next question is occasional gambling a sin?
So this one actually came in yesterday specifically for this. Man, I'm going to tell you, my answer, I think, is going to be biblical, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to be popular. Or maybe it will be once you listen to the whole thing. Don't just turn it off when I say my initial statement. My initial statement is this. The Bible doesn't say a single thing about gambling. There's not one single verse that talks about gambling. Now, my guess is that's because that wasn't really a thing, maybe, perhaps, that God needed to address. It's a lot like, people always go, well, the Bible doesn't say anything about cocaine. Right? Well, it's like, yeah, but are we going to reason to that God thinks cocaine is like a good idea?
I mean, no.
No, of course not. So the Bible actually says nothing about gambling, but I'm going to guess that culturally maybe that just wasn't a big deal. I don't even know if it was around yet. I just know that the Bible says nothing about gambling. However, so don't turn me off, don't cancel me for saying that. I will say this, when it comes to gambling, you need to know what those funds go towards before you would participate. I wouldn't suggest participating in it anyways for other reasons that I'll get to shortly. But like if you were to participate, you need to know where those funds are going. Right? Sometimes gambling can go to some unsavory activities, as does a lot of the stuff where you go and spend money. I'm not one of those let's boycott everything that whatever. You just can't live your life like that. But you do need to know, hey, what does this organization support type deal? Is this is what they're getting these funds for actually a net positive for my community or not, or is it going to tear my community down? You should know that. The other thing that the thing that the Bible does talk about though is good stewardship, and I don't know that anyone can make a case for good stewardship and gambling in the same conversation. Right. So I would say, is occasional gambling a sin? I would say, well, has God directed you? Has He given you a direct command not to do it?
Yeah.
So you shouldn't do it. Does it go towards things that you don't think that God would want you to support? Does it deter from you being able to take care of your family, which would then turn that into a sin for sure? Does it turn you away from being a good father, a good mother, a good husband, a good wife, a good friend, a good community member? Does it cause you to become the type of person that can no longer properly share the image of God in your community? These are the things that you should consider. So for me, and again, people may not like this. If I were to go to a facility where gambling took place, there's a dog track up in Cross Lanes. Megan and I went on a date there one time, but we don't gamble, right? But I'll go play those games, knowing that like this is an activity.
Yeah, you
like,
budget for it.
Yeah, I've got
say,
$20 in my pocket that I could either go to the movies or I can play games here. Right? That's how we saw it. Like, I think we've done this literally once. So it's like I'm not out at the dog track every weekend, guys. But like for us, that was just like this is an activity that we were going to do, right? Like I'm not like out there like, oh gosh, I got to make my mortgage, like type deal. Like it was like we went to dinner out there, and we were like, hey, let's. I've never played. This is how little I know about it. What the game that you, the ball goes around, it gets stuck somewhere. Is that craps?
I think
or
so.
Roulette.
Roulette.
Yeah. Like I was like, so I'm just picking black or red
Craps
or whatever. It was
so
funny. Like it for me, it was like I was, just playing. Okay, so when we went to the beach this summer, my kids spent way more than that $20 at the arcade.
Right.
For me, it's very much similar when you use it
in that
or
way.
do it in that way. It's an activity. Like I'm not like gambling because I'm not. This is $20 set aside for my date, and that's it. I'm not like. I didn't go make $300 this past week and then go like, I'm gonna go risk it all and try to double it.
Right.
Like, no, and I mean the Proverbs just warns about get rich quick schemes and things like that. How they're not wise. I as a general rule of thumb would say gambling is a really unwise thing.
Yeah.
I don't know that I can always put it in the sinful category. But I would put it definitely in the unwise category.
Yeah.
And
I think asking those questions obviously are really important. Like, this is one of those like, hey, what's your motive behind this? Are you trying to ask this because you're wanting permission to go do this?
Yeah.
Or are you asking this because like it's something you've done and somebody has come down hard on you before? Like, hey, took my wife on a date. And my
there were
family
definitely
like
people
thinks,
that are going to be upset that I just shared that.
Yeah,
But, like,
I mean, my husband, the company he used to work for, they did like an employee dinner there, and they actually all gave us like some preloaded cards that had like $20 or $50, something like that on for us to go play, and like we did that, but like it was just fun because it was like we're not spending our money, we're just doing this, and we don't care what happens to it because it's whatever. But gambling by nature is gambling. Like it's a gamble. It's a toss up whether you're going to make money or not. So like if you're taking that money that you actually need for something and trying to go make more money, I like the guy that I dated that was not a Christian. This was a thing that happened. He took the money that was supposed to go to bills and went and gambled it all away and and hid it for a long time. So if it becomes like an addiction, a thing that you're hiding from someone, like that's taken those things away from what's needed.
Yeah, if you have to hide it from anyone, then you already know the answer to your question.
Yeah.
Right? You already know. If this is not something like, like if you're, whatever it is, if you can't tell your spouse about it, like this is not, you're not using it as like an activity, right? Like if it's becoming a habit, if it's something that you can't stop, like this is not good.
Right.
I honestly, just as a general rule of thumb, like I've probably played in casinos like twice in my since I got saved, like twice, and it was always that situation where it was like me and my wife we're just
you guys
out.
Took a trip to Vegas, right?
Yeah, we went to Vegas. I'm like, okay, we have a budget. This is this is activity. I can either go and do this activity or I can do this activity. It does for us, we had already set that up, and it was just like, hey, we're gonna. I'm not thinking, oh man, we're gonna buy a new house now because we're gonna hit it. No, it's like it's for us. It was just I just see that differently. Yeah. But by a general rule of thumb, I would say like if this is a really regular activity for you, I would really caution you to do something different with your time and with your family's money. I just would do something different.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I think this wasn't a question, but we were talking a little bit before this and about sin. And there were some questions that came in about sin or surrounding sin. And I think one of the things that people, that holds people back a lot of times is that they feel like once they get saved, they should no longer ever be tempted to sin.
Yeah.
And that's difficult because if we know Scripture, we know Jesus was tempted.
Yeah.
Right? But it's not the temptation that's a problem.
Exactly.
it's what you do with that temptation.
Yeah.
So how can we live our lives in such a way, like you talked a little bit yesterday about trajectory with the question that talked about where is it? Can we get to heaven if we continue the same sins that we ask forgiveness for?
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to that and let's talk a little bit around that aspect about like trajectory and how we handle temptation in our lives in a way that we can kind of get over that hurdle of feeling like this aspect of like, hey, if I gambled once, is that a sin and am I going to hell? Hey, if I do this once, like if I like fall back and have a drink or get drunk once, am I like, how can we live and just focus on that trajectory and remember those questions, some of the questions that we can ask ourselves or think in those moments to get us over that thought process that keeps us asking these questions of like, and that fear that surrounds it of, going to hell or whatever.
It's a really hard rewiring because most of us were raised in those environments. As far as if your family was religious, if they went to church, there's a very good chance that you went to a church where it was like 1 + 1 = 2 every single time. There's no caveat. There's no gray. There's no like, what about the like? There's like formulaic Christianity was so rampant in like the 80s and 90s that we grew up in that it's very hard to unwire. I feel that in myself, even though like I would drastically teach against it, it's still very much wired in me that I'm wondering like we ask these questions like, is gambling a sin? Because like somewhere someone told us, man, there is a list that you got to follow.
No drinking.
There's a list.
Gambling, no,
and they go like, listen, that list could be infinitely long if you understood what sin really was. And so like when we start, is this a sin? Is this a sin? Is this a sin? Is this a sin? And for a lot of it, I would go, well, let's talk about it. Let's go. There's clearly some black and white stuff in the scriptures. I would say, yeah, that's a sin every single time, no matter how you cut it.
Yeah.
But then your list of what could be a sin could be drastically longer or somewhat shorter than mine, based on how the Lord has directly spoken to you. Because I know people that like they would. I knew a pastor one time. He would not even go to any establishments that served alcohol whatsoever. Would not go to them. That was what the Lord laid on his heart.
Yeah.
He didn't impose that on everyone else because that's not what the scriptures say.
Right.
But for him, that's what the Lord told him to do. Right? And like so for other people, the Lord may have told you, listen, you're not to listen to that type of music. You're not to like for me, this is probably a silly example, but this is like a silly example that will explain like maybe something more difficult. I've seen a lot of Christians and even pastors that have watched the show Game of Thrones. And Game of Thrones has been like just so culturally popular that I'm so interested and intrigued by it. I want to know what it's all about.
I've heard
it's
not worth it.
Every time that I have like even thought about it, the Lord goes, no, don't do it.
Yeah.
You know what sort of content is in there. Don't do it.
Yeah.
And so for me, I just haven't done it.
Right.
But then like I look at other people that get to do that, and I'm like, well, why do even pastors that'll post that they've seen that show? I'm like, well, why is it? And so for me, I go, well, first off, I shouldn't be focused on what someone else is doing anyways.
Right.
Because that person may be disobedient to God, or they may not have the same issues that I have that lead God to put certain prohibitions on my life that he didn't put on someone else's life. And so, like, we just have to get out of this mindset that everything is so nice and neat.
Yeah.
And that, like, there is some sort of list of do's and don'ts that is comprehensive for everyone.
Yeah.
There's definitely a list in the scriptures that's black and white.
Yeah.
But then that list is like it's never taken away. I will say,
Right.
like, so don't take what I'm saying as like, for some people murder's okay. I'm not saying that.
No,
I'm saying that list is the same.
Like, it's a personal faith journey.
Yes, exactly.
And it's a journey because yes, when salvation happens, there's that initial sanctification that happens. You're made new and all of those things. But we forget that there's still a process after that. Like that fleshly desire does not disappear.
Not at all.
It is still there. And scripture shows that. Like Paul struggled with it. Like you see those things. And so knowing and it just saying, okay, I acknowledge this. It's there. But then move on from it. Like, hey.
Treat it more like there was a song whenever I first got saved that was always out. And it was like, it's got to be more like a relationship than I can't remember how it went.
I'm terrible with song help.
But
sorry.
it was talking about like if more people would understand that the answers to your questions are found in the following of Jesus, not in just lists and rules and all, like learning to actually follow Jesus will lead you into that truth and it will lead you away from these things that continually trip you up.
Yeah.
It's like seeing your faith in that way. Like the call of Jesus was come follow me.
Yep.
And if you will do that every day and stay close to him, listen to him, talk to him, he will lead you where you need to go, and it will be what you'll find out is that you're going to go far beyond past rules and regulations and lists and all of this stuff to a place that like you actually feel like who the Son sets free is free indeed. It will actually feel like freedom. Not because you're out there doing whatever you want to do, but because you'll finally want to do what you ought to do. It will it'll be like literally being set free. Yeah. But that's why so many people, they get saved and they don't feel free. It's because they never actually just let Jesus follow Jesus out of religion and into an actual relationship where he goes like, hey God, like here's this opportunity in front of me. How should I handle this? Hey God, I'm really angry right now. Like,
where's this coming
actually
from?
Following Jesus rather than looking for some prescription or routine to follow to appease your guilt or to appease your shame or whatever it is. Like, actually following Jesus is what does it. And as you do that, you're going to realize, just like the disciples did, some days you are at your absolute best, and other days you are Peter outside of Jesus's court hearing, and you're the one that's denying him and making an absolute fool of him. But then 7 days later, you're being restored back, and then it would and guys, we would be foolish to think that was Peter's final failure.
Right.
We even know that the Apostle Paul fussed at Peter for his own racism in the New Testament church. So Peter didn't, even after Jesus restored him on the beach, he still didn't have it all together. Right. But he was committed to a life and a trajectory of following Jesus that I'm going to guess as it went on, it got better, it got sweeter. He still made mistakes, but yet he felt freer and felt closer to God as he did it, as he moved away from the law, the constraints of the Jewish law that were never able to change his heart. And as he really started to follow Jesus, fall in love with Jesus, his heart then changed, and then a lot of this other stuff begins to fade away.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, that is your practical next step. Just follow Jesus. This coming week, we are going, this coming week is a cool week. We have our Youth Sunday that is being led, and so we're going to dive deeper into what Ryan Smith is going to be sharing with us next week. But after that, we start our For the Future series, and it's going to be really awesome. So we hope that if you have not subscribed to this podcast, please do so. And we'll be back here again next week with some practical next steps for your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.